The evening shadows stretched across the polished floors of Westfield Conservatory of Music as Maylene gently pushed her cleaning cart down the empty hallway. The building had fallen quiet after a long day of lessons and practice, the last students having left hours ago. This was her favorite time, when the grand building belonged to her alone, and the lingering notes of music seemed to hang in the air like invisible friends. May had been cleaning at the conservatory for nearly 8 years now. At 42, her hands showed the signs of hard work, small calluses from scrubbing floors and wiping down countless surfaces day after day. Yet there was a certain grace to how she moved, an attentiveness that seemed out of place for someone merely tidying up after others. "Good evening, Mrs. Abernathy," May called softly to the elderly receptionist who was gathering her things to leave. "Did you have a nice day?"
"Oh, hello, dear."
"Yes, quite busy with the upcoming gala. You'll be working late this week, I'm afraid. The directors want everything spotless for the donors." The older woman patted May's arm sympathetically. "Don't work too hard." May nodded with a small smile. Extra hours meant extra pay, and every dollar mattered when you were sending a child to college on a cleaner's wages. As the front door closed behind Mrs. Abernathy, May continued her rounds, moving from the lobby toward the practice rooms. The hallway was lined with photographs, famous musicians who had either taught or performed at Westfield over its 80-year history. May rarely looked at them anymore except to dust their frames, but tonight she paused before one particular image, a young woman holding a violin, her expression intense yet joyful as she played. Something about the photograph always made May's heart twist with a familiar ache. With a sigh, she pushed her cart forward and entered the first practice room. The small room contained just a piano and a music stand, but the next room on her cleaning route was different. Room 7 was where the string students practiced, and tonight someone had left a violin case open on one of the chairs. May frowned slightly. The students were usually careful with their instruments, especially at a place like Westfield where many played on borrowed instruments worth more than what she earned in a year. She moved closer to ensure the violin hadn't been damaged. The instrument lay nestled in deep blue velvet, its wood glowing amber under the room's lights. Without thinking, May reached out, her fingers hovering just above the strings without touching them. 15 years had passed since she'd last held a violin, but the pull was still there, like an old friend calling her name. No one knew about May's past, not her supervisor, not her co-workers, and certainly not the esteemed faculty who barely noticed her existence. They didn't know that in another life, before she had crossed an ocean in search of better opportunities, May Lee had been considered a promising violinist in her hometown. They couldn't see the young girl who had practiced for hours in a tiny apartment, her parents sacrificing to pay for lessons from the only teacher in their district. May glanced at the door, listening for any sounds in the hallway. The building was empty now. Even the night guard wouldn't make his rounds for another hour. With trembling hands, she carefully lifted the violin from its case. The weight of it felt both foreign and achingly familiar in her palms. She positioned it against her shoulder, her body remembering the stance without conscious thought. No bow, she noticed. The student must have taken it for re-hairing, a common enough practice. Mee contented herself with simply holding the instrument, her left hand finding positions on the fingerboard that once had been as natural as breathing. For a moment, she closed her eyes and imagined the music, Vivaldi's Winter from the Four Seasons. The piece she had been preparing for a competition before life had intervened with its harsh realities. Her father's sudden illness, the mounting medical bills, the impossible choice between pursuing music and helping her family survive. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" The sharp voice shattered the silence, and May nearly dropped the violin in shock. Standing in the doorway was Professor Wilson, the stern-faced head of the strings department. His cold eyes narrowed as he took in the scene, a cleaning lady holding a student's instrument. I'm sorry," May stammered, carefully returning the violin to its case. "It was left out. I was just checking to make sure it was safe. By picking it up, do you have any idea how valuable that instrument is?" His voice dripped with disdain. "That's a Thomas Earl violin on loan to one of our scholarship students. It's worth more than you probably make in 5 years. Heat rushed to May's face. "I didn't mean any harm. I know how to handle—" "You know how to clean toilets and empty trash cans," Professor Wilson interrupted. "That's what you're paid for. Not touching things that don't belong to you." The words stung more than they should have. After all, May had grown accustomed to being invisible at Westfield, just another service worker easily overlooked by the talented and privileged who filled its halls. But something about the professor's assumption that she couldn't possibly understand the value of what she held awoke an old pride she had long suppressed. "I used to play," she said quietly, the words escaping before she could stop them. Professor Wilson raised an eyebrow, his mouth curving into something between a smirk and a smile. "Did you now? Well, that's charming." His tone made it clear he didn't find it charming at all. "I suggest you stick to your mop, Ms. Lynn," she supplied. "May Lynn, Ms. Lynn. Finish your work and leave the instruments to those who've dedicated their lives to mastering them." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving May alone with her humiliation. She took a deep breath, fighting the burning behind her eyes. It had been foolish to touch the violin, foolish to reveal even that tiny glimpse of her past. People like Professor Wilson would never see beyond her uniform, her accent, her role as the woman who cleaned up after their important lives. May finished cleaning the practice rooms with mechanical efficiency, her earlier pleasure in the quiet building now replaced with a desire to complete her tasks and leave. As she worked, her mind drifted to her small apartment across town, where a stack of bills waited on the kitchen table, and a letter from her son, David, was pinned to the refrigerator. David was the reason for everything, every long shift, every missed opportunity, every swallowed pride. Her brilliant boy, now in his second year at the State University studying engineering, was going to have the chances she never did. When she had arrived in America with a 7-year-old son and 2 suitcases, May had packed away her musical dreams alongside the few photographs of her previous life. She'd found work wherever she could, eventually securing the night cleaning position at Westfield because it paid slightly better than the hotel jobs she'd held before. As she wheeled her cart toward the storage closet at the end of her shift, May passed the conservatory's grand performance hall. The door stood slightly ajar, allowing a slice of light to spill into the hallway. Curious, she peeked inside. The hall was empty except for a young man sitting at the piano on stage, his fingers moving slowly over a piece that May recognized, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. She stood listening for a moment, allowing the gentle melody to wash over her. The pianist stopped suddenly, shaking his head in frustration. He tried the passage again, but something was clearly troubling him about his performance. After a third attempt, he slammed his hands down on the keys in frustration. Without thinking, May spoke. "You're rushing the middle section." The young man looked up, startled. "Excuse me?" He instantly regretted speaking. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have interrupted." "No, please." He gestured for her to come in. "What were you saying about the middle section?" Hesitantly, May entered the hall, leaving her cart by the door. "It needs to breathe more. The piece tells a story, but you're not giving it time to unfold." The young man studied her with curious eyes, taking in her cleaning uniform and the gray-streaked hair tucked neatly into a bun. Instead of dismissing her, he nodded slowly. "Show me?" May froze. It had been so long since anyone had asked for her opinion on music. Slowly, she approached the piano and with a nod from the student sat down on the bench. "May I?" she asked, hovering her hands over the keys. When he nodded, she began to play. Not the entire piece, just the troublesome middle passage. Her fingers remembered, finding the notes with a confidence that surprised even her. She played it as she felt it should be, with slight pauses that allowed the emotion to build naturally. When she finished, she quickly stood up, suddenly aware of how strange this moment was. The cleaning lady giving advice to a conservatory student. "That was beautiful," the young man said, genuine amazement in his voice. "Do you play professionally?" May gave a small, sad smile. "No, not anymore. I should finish my work now." As she retreated to her cart, the young man called after her. "I'm Thomas, by the way. What's your name?" "May," she answered simply before pushing her cart down the hallway. That night, as she walked to the bus stop under a sky dusted with stars, May felt something stir inside her, a feeling she had almost forgotten. Part longing, part regret, but also something else, something that felt strangely like possibility. Word spread quickly among the Westfield Conservatory faculty about the cleaning lady who had touched a student's violin. By the following afternoon, Professor Wilson had transformed the simple incident into a story of how he'd caught the help pawing at expensive instruments. She couldn't possibly understand May. Arrived for her evening shift unaware of how her small act of longing had become the subject of mockery in the faculty lounge. She went about her duties as usual, keeping her head down and her thoughts to herself. The conservatory was busier than normal, with students practicing late for upcoming recitals and staff preparing for the annual donor gala just 2 weeks away. As May polished the brass handrails in the main hall, she noticed Thomas, the piano student from the night before, waving to her from across the lobby. He smiled warmly and changed direction to approach her. "Good evening, May," he said with genuine friendliness. "I tried that passage again the way you showed me. My instructor was impressed with the improvement." May glanced around nervously, worried about being seen chatting with a student. "That's good to hear," she said quietly. "I should get back to work now." "Wait," Thomas said, lowering his voice. "I wanted to warn you about something. There's talk among the professors. About you." A cold feeling settled in May's stomach. "What kind of talk?" "Professor Wilson told everyone you claimed to be some kind of violin expert. He's been making jokes about it." Thomas looked uncomfortable. "He's not a nice man. Some of us students have complained about him before, but his family donates a lot of money to the school." May clutched her polishing cloth tightly. "I never claimed to be an expert. I only said I used to play. Well, just be careful around him. He likes to make examples of people." With a sympathetic nod, Thomas hurried off to his evening class, leaving May with a growing sense of unease. Later that night, as May cleaned the administrative wing, she overheard voices coming from the director's office. The door was partially open, and against her better judgment, she slowed her work to listen when she heard her name mentioned. The Lynn woman. "The custodian?" It was Director Phillips, the conservatory's administrator. "What about her?" "I think we should include her in the gala program." The unmistakable voice of Professor Wilson carried into the hallway, tinged with an undercurrent of amusement that made May freeze in place. "Include her how exactly?" The director sounded confused. "As a performer." A few chuckles followed Wilson's words, and May realized there were several faculty members in the room. "She informed me yesterday that she used to play the violin. Quite well, I imagine, from her tone." Someone else spoke up, Professor Yamamoto from the percussion department. "Are you serious, Wilson? We can't have the cleaning staff performing at the donor gala. These people contribute millions to our endowment." "That's exactly why it would be perfect," Wilson continued. "We'll bill it as our commitment to recognizing talent in unexpected places. The donors will eat up the inclusivity angle, and if she makes a fool of herself, which she will, we can all have a good laugh and move on." May's heart pounded in her chest. They were planning to humiliate her, to turn her into a joke for wealthy people's entertainment. She should walk away, pretend she never heard this conversation. Yet something kept her rooted to the spot. "I don't know, Wilson." The director sounded hesitant. "Seems unnecessarily cruel." "I'll bet you $100 she can't play a single recognizable melody," Wilson pressed. "Besides, I've already mentioned the idea to Lawrence Grant." May recognized that name. Lawrence Grant was the conservatory's biggest benefactor, a billionaire who had donated the east wing of the building. "You told Grant, without consulting me first?" The director's voice rose slightly. "He loved the idea," Wilson replied smoothly. "Said it reminded him of those talent shows on television. The ones where the unassuming janitor turns out to have the voice of an angel, or crashes and burns trying." More laughter followed, and May felt her face grow hot with humiliation and anger. She wanted to burst into the room and tell them all exactly what she thought of their cruel game. Instead, she quietly pushed her cart further down the hallway, away from the voices that discussed her fate as if she were nothing more than an evening's entertainment. The next morning, May received a call from Director Phillips's office requesting she come in early for her shift. With a sinking feeling, she arrived at the conservatory at 4 in the afternoon instead of her usual 6:00 start time. The director's assistant showed her into the office, where both Director Phillips and Professor Wilson were waiting. The director looked uncomfortable while Wilson wore a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Lynn, thank you for coming in early," Director Phillips began. "We have a rather unusual request for you." May remained standing, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Yes, sir?" "As you know, the annual donor gala is our most important event of the year. Professor Wilson has suggested that we include a special segment highlighting the diverse talents within our Westfield community. Wilson jumped in, his voice oily with false sincerity. "We'd like you to perform a short violin piece at the gala, Ms. Lin. Nothing complicated. Just a simple demonstration of your abilities." Though May had overheard their scheme the night before, hearing it proposed to her face still felt like a slap. She swallowed hard before responding. "I haven't played in 15 years. I don't even own a violin anymore." "We can provide an instrument, of course," Wilson said quickly. "One of the student models would be appropriate, I think." Director Phillips looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Ms. Lin, I want to be clear that this is entirely voluntary. If you don't wish to participate—" "Actually," Wilson interrupted, "we're implementing a new policy requiring all full-time staff to contribute to institutional events in some capacity. Participation in at least one showcase event per year will be required going forward." He smiled coldly at May. "Of course, if you'd prefer not to comply with the new policy." The threat hung in the air between them. Mai understood what he was implying. Refuse, and she could lose her job. A job that paid for her son's textbooks, for their small apartment, for the medication that kept her mother comfortable back home. "When would I practice?" she asked quietly. "I work nights here and days at the hotel." "We can arrange for you to use a practice room for 1 hour before your shift," the director offered, seemingly relieved she hadn't outright refused. "The gala is 2 weeks from Saturday." 2 weeks. After 15 years away from the instrument, they expected her to prepare a performance in 2 weeks. The impossibility of it struck May like a physical blow. "What would I play?" she asked. Wilson waved his hand dismissively. "Something simple. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, perhaps? We wouldn't want to overwhelm you with anything too challenging." His condescension stoked a fire in May's chest. Before she could stop herself, she said, "I'll need sheet music for Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto in D major. First movement only." Wilson's smug smile faltered. "That's one of the most difficult pieces in the repertoire." "I'm aware," May replied, meeting his gaze steadily for the first time. "If I'm going to make a fool of myself, I might as well do it properly." Director Phillips coughed uncomfortably. "Well, that's settled then. We'll have the music and a practice violin ready for you tomorrow. And Ms. Lin, thank you for your enthusiasm." As May left the office, her calm exterior masked the turmoil within. What had she done? The Tchaikovsky concerto had been her dream piece as a young woman. The mountain she had been preparing to climb before life forced her to put away childish dreams. Now she had 2 weeks to relearn what had taken years to master. That night, after her shift ended at midnight, May sat at her kitchen table with a pencil and paper. She drew the outline of a violin fingerboard and marked the positions where her fingers would need to go for the Tchaikovsky piece. It was an old practice technique her teacher had taught her, training the mind when the instrument wasn't available. As she worked through the imaginary notes, doubt crept in. Her hands were older now, roughened by years of manual labor. Her ear was out of practice, her muscles untrained. Professor Wilson was right. She would likely humiliate herself in front of the most powerful people associated with the conservatory. But as the first light of dawn crept through her thin curtains, May made a decision. If they wanted to make her a spectacle, she would give them a performance they would never forget, for better or worse. The girl who had once dreamed of concert halls hadn't disappeared entirely. She had just been waiting for the right moment to return. The first time May held a violin again, her hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped the instrument. She stood alone in practice room number 7, the same room where Professor Wilson had caught her 2 weeks earlier. The school had provided her with a basic student model violin, not terrible, but certainly not the quality she'd once played on as a young woman. "It's just wood and strings," she whispered to herself, trying to calm her racing heart. Just wood and strings. The bow felt awkward in her right hand, her fingers stiff from years of cleaning rather than creating. She drew it tentatively across the open strings, wincing at the scratchy sound that emerged. 15 years of silence had taken their toll. May glanced at the clock on the wall. She had exactly 1 hour before her regular shift began. 1 hour each day for the next 2 weeks to prepare for a piece that conservatory students spent months perfecting. The impossibility of her task loomed before her like a mountain too steep to climb. But mountains, her father had always told her, are climbed one step at a time. She began with the basics, scales and simple exercises she still remembered from her youth. Up and down, her fingers fumbling for positions they once knew by heart. The muscles in her forearm burned with the unfamiliar strain. By the time her hour ended, all she had to show for her efforts were blistered fingertips and a sore shoulder. "How's our little virtuoso coming along?" Professor Wilson's mocking voice caught her as she put the violin away. He stood in the doorway, watching her with undisguised amusement. "I'm making progress," May answered quietly, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her discouraged. "I've added your name to the program," he said, dropping a printed sheet on the nearby table. "Right between the opening remarks and the student showcase. Prime placement for maximum impact." After he left, May picked up the program. There it was in black and white. Special performance, Maylin Conservatory staff. The sight of her name made it all real in a way it hadn't been before. In less than 2 weeks, she would stand before hundreds of wealthy donors and either reclaim a piece of her lost self or confirm every dismissive assumption Professor Wilson had made about her. That night, after her shift ended at midnight, May did something she hadn't done in years. Instead of taking the bus directly home, she walked 3 extra blocks to a 24-hour internet cafe. Paying for an hour of computer time, she searched for recordings of the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto. As the music filled her headphones, May closed her eyes. This piece had once been her dream, the mountain she had hoped to conquer before life forced her onto a different path. Now, as she listened to the soaring melody and technically demanding passages, doubt crept in. Had she lost her mind choosing this piece? It was considered one of the most difficult works in the violin repertoire. "Too late now," she murmured, hitting replay and focusing on the fingerings and bow techniques she would need to master. The days fell into a grueling routine. May worked her morning shift at the hotel, caught a few hours of sleep in the afternoon, then headed to the conservatory for her hour of practice before beginning her night cleaning job. The lack of sleep left dark circles under her eyes, but her fingers were slowly remembering their purpose. By the end of the first week, calluses had replaced the blisters on her fingertips. The muscle memory was returning, though her tone was still thin and her intonation inconsistent. She focused on the opening sections of the concerto, knowing she wouldn't have time to master the entire first movement. "You're holding tension in your shoulder," a voice observed on her 8th day of practice. May turned to find Thomas standing in the doorway, a stack of sheet music under his arm. "The practice rooms are for students," she said, embarrassed to be caught struggling through a passage. "I'm not here to practice. I'm here to help." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "I heard what Wilson is doing. It's not right." "I agreed to it," May said, lowering the violin. "Not like you had a choice." Thomas set his music on a chair. "I've been playing piano accompaniment for the violin students for 3 years now. I know the Tchaikovsky well. Maybe I can help?" For the next hour, and every day that followed, Thomas sacrificed his own practice time to work with May. He offered suggestions on phrasing, helped her with difficult passages, and most importantly, believed she could do it when she began to doubt herself. "Why are you being so kind to me?" May asked him after a particularly frustrating session. "I'm just the cleaning lady." Thomas looked at her thoughtfully. "My grandmother was a concert pianist in Vietnam. When she came to America after the war, no one would hire her to play. She cleaned houses until the day she died." He smiled sadly. "I guess I'm helping the person no one helped her become." 3 days before the gala, disaster struck. As May practiced a challenging run of 16th notes, her E string snapped with a sharp crack. "No, no, no," she whispered, examining the violin. Without all 4 strings, she couldn't practice, and she had no money to buy replacements. Just then the door opened and an elderly man with stooped shoulders entered. May recognized him as Mr. Gao, the conservatory's instrument technician. "Thomas said you might need these," he said, holding out a small package. Inside were 4 new strings, not the cheap kind but professional-grade ones that cost more than May earned in a day. "I can't accept. The boy already paid for them," Mr. Gao interrupted. "Now let me show you how to string them properly. These hands have prepared instruments for some of the greatest violinists in the world. They can certainly help you." As the old man worked, his gnarled fingers moving with surprising dexterity, he spoke softly. "I've been listening outside your door, you know. Each day a little better. The music is still inside you." May felt tears prick her eyes. "But it's not enough. I'll never be ready in time." Mr. Gao finished stringing the violin and handed it back to her. When you play, what do you think about? The notes, May answered. The fingerings. Everything I'm doing wrong. The old man shook his head. That's your problem. You must think about why you play, not how. He pointed to his heart. The technique will follow when you remember this. On the night of the gala, May arrived early as instructed. She wore her best outfit, a simple dark blue dress she had ironed carefully that morning. It wasn't fancy like the designer gowns the donors' wives would wear, but it was clean and dignified. Backstage was chaos as student performers warmed up and staff members rushed about with last-minute preparations. May found a quiet corner where she could prepare mentally for what was to come. Nervous? Professor Wilson appeared, dressed in a tailored tuxedo with a crimson bow tie. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Yes, May admitted, seeing no point in denying it. You should be. He checked his watch. The hall is filling up nicely. Lawrence Grant is here with his entire foundation board, the president of the Symphony Association as well. He looked her up and down with poorly concealed disdain. Try not to embarrass us too badly, will you? Before May could respond, Director Phillips approached, looking harried. 15 minutes to curtain, Professor. Ms. Lin, you'll be announced after my welcome speech. As they walked away, May closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing heart. What had she been thinking? In a few minutes, she would stand before some of the most influential people in the music world and attempt a piece that professional violinists spent years perfecting. May? It was Thomas, dressed formally in the black attire required of student performers. I brought someone to meet you. Beside him stood an elegant older woman in a burgundy evening gown. This is Dr. Renata Vasquez, head of the strings department at State University. The woman extended her hand with a warm smile. Thomas has told me about your situation. I wanted to wish you luck tonight. Thank you, May replied, confused by the unexpected visitor. I'll be watching with great interest, Dr. Vasquez said. It takes courage to do what you're doing. Remember to breathe. As they left, May heard the sound of applause from the hall. Director Phillips had taken the stage to begin his remarks. Soon it would be her turn. May picked up the violin, not the student model she'd been practicing on, but a much nicer instrument Mr. Gao had pressed into her hands an hour earlier. This belongs to a graduate student who's away at a competition, he'd whispered. She would want you to use it. It will sing for you if you let it. The stage manager appeared at her side. You're up next, Ms. Lin. Ready? No, she wasn't ready. 2 weeks wasn't enough time to prepare for this moment. But as she heard Director Phillips announcing her name to a smattering of polite, curious applause, May thought of her son studying late in his dorm room, of her father who had sold his watch to buy her first violin, of all the dreams she had packed away for the sake of survival. She thought of Mr. Gao's words, remember why you play, not how, and suddenly May knew why she was doing this, not to prove Professor Wilson wrong, not even to reclaim her past. She was playing because music had been her first language, the way her heart had spoken before life taught her to be silent. Taking a deep breath, May walked onto the brightly lit stage, the weight of hundreds of curious stares pressing down on her like a physical force. The stage lights were blinding. May couldn't see the audience clearly, just shadowy figures seated in the grand hall of Westfield Conservatory. She heard whispers, the rustle of programs, a few coughs. The silence that followed felt heavy with expectation. Ladies and gentlemen, Director Phillips's voice rang out as he stood at the podium. Next we have a special performance from one of our dedicated staff members, May Lin. The polite applause that followed held a note of confusion. This wasn't typical gala entertainment, and the wealthy donors weren't sure what to make of it. In the front row, May could just make out Professor Wilson's satisfied smirk as he leaned over to whisper something to Lawrence Grant, the billionaire benefactor, who chuckled in response. May's legs felt like water as she took her position at center stage. The violin, far better than anything she'd played on in years, rested against her shoulder, unfamiliar yet comforting. She raised her bow, and for a terrible moment her mind went completely blank. Panic rose in her chest. What was she doing here? This had been a mistake, a foolish attempt to reclaim something long lost. Then, from the side of the stage, she caught a glimpse of Thomas giving her an encouraging nod. Behind him stood Mr. Gao, the elderly instrument technician, his weathered hands clasped as if in prayer. They believed in her when no one else did, not even herself. May closed her eyes and took a deep breath, remembering her father's words from long ago. The music is already inside you. The violin just helps it come out. She brought the bow to the strings and began. The opening notes of Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto filled the hall. Tentative at first, slightly shaky from nerves. May kept her eyes closed, focusing only on the feel of the instrument, on the melody that had lived in her heart for 15 years of silence. From his seat, Professor Wilson's smirk began to fade. The cleaning lady wasn't just playing random notes. She was actually attempting the Tchaikovsky. Poorly, he assumed, but the very audacity of it irritated him. He had expected her to fumble through a simple tune, not tackle one of the most challenging pieces in the classical repertoire. On stage, something was happening to May. As she moved deeper into the piece, muscle memory from years of dedicated practice in her youth began to awaken. Her fingers found their places on the fingerboard with increasing confidence. The bow strokes grew more assured. Most importantly, she stopped thinking about technique and surrendered to the music itself. By the time she reached the main theme, May had forgotten about the audience, about Professor Wilson's scheme, about the 15 years spent cleaning instead of playing. There was only the violin singing beneath her chin and the music flowing through her like a river that had finally broken through a dam. The whispers in the audience had stopped. The coughing ceased. 200 pairs of eyes watched in stunned silence as the small woman in the simple blue dress coaxed sounds from the violin that professional musicians spent lifetimes trying to achieve. Was her playing perfect? No. There were missed notes, places where her lack of recent practice showed through. But there was something in her performance that technical perfection couldn't touch. A raw emotional honesty that reached into the hearts of everyone listening. In the front row, Lawrence Grant leaned forward in his seat, his expression shifting from amused curiosity to genuine amazement. Beside him, Professor Wilson had gone pale, his mouth slightly open as he watched his cruel joke transforming into something entirely unexpected. Halfway through the movement, May opened her eyes. The stage fright was gone, replaced by a sense of homecoming. This was who she had always been beneath the cleaning uniform, beneath the years of sacrifice and hard work. As her bow danced across the strings during a particularly difficult passage, she felt tears spring to her eyes, not from sadness but from the pure joy of reclaiming this piece of herself. From the wings, Thomas watched with growing excitement. He had heard May practicing, had known she had talent, but nothing had prepared him for this transformation. The woman on stage wasn't the quiet cleaning lady anymore. She was an artist, expressing through music what words could never say. Near the back of the hall, Dr. Renata Vasquez, the strings professor Thomas had introduced earlier, watched with professional interest that gradually gave way to emotion. She dabbed at her eyes as May navigated the concerto's most poignant section, with a depth of feeling that technical training alone could never produce. As May approached the finale, her confidence soared. Her body swayed with the music, her face alight with the kind of transcendent joy that comes from doing exactly what you were born to do. The final notes rang out clear and true, hanging in the air like a question waiting to be answered. For 3 heartbeats after she lowered her bow, the hall remained in perfect silence, then it erupted. The applause began slowly, a few hesitant claps that quickly swelled into thunderous acclaim. People rose to their feet, first a few, then entire rows, until the whole audience was standing, their faces showing genuine amazement and appreciation. May stood frozen in place, overwhelmed by the response. This wasn't polite applause. It was a genuine ovation. Through tears that blurred her vision, she could see Lawrence Grant on his feet, clapping enthusiastically while Professor Wilson remained seated, his face a mask of disbelief and growing dismay. Director Phillips hurried onto the stage, his expression a mixture of shock and newfound respect. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said into the microphone, his voice breaking slightly. "May Lin." The applause continued as May gave an awkward bow, unsure of the proper protocol. She had never performed for an audience this large or this prestigious. As she left the stage on shaky legs, Thomas was the first to meet her. "That was incredible," he said, his eyes shining with admiration. "You showed them all." Mr. Gao approached next, his wizened face creased with a proud smile. "The music was always there," he said softly, patting her hand. "It just needed to be remembered." Backstage became a flurry of activity as word spread about the cleaning lady's extraordinary performance. Student performers who had previously looked through May as if she were invisible now approached with shy congratulations. Faculty members who had laughed at Professor Wilson's joke just days earlier pretended they had never doubted her abilities. Ms. Lin, a commanding voice cut through the chatter. Dr. Vasquez stood before her, elegant in her evening gown but with the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had spent decades teaching talented musicians. That was quite a performance. Thank you, May replied, still breathless from the experience. I'm very out of practice. That much was evident, Dr. Vasquez said with professional frankness. Your technique needs refinement. Your intonation was inconsistent in the upper positions, and your bow control in the spiccato passages requires work. May's face fell slightly. However, the professor continued, her expression softening. I haven't heard that concerto played with such honest emotion in many years. Technical skills can be taught, but what you have, that connection to the music, that's something special. She handed May a business card. Call my office next week. I'd like to discuss some possibilities with you. Before May could respond, a commotion near the stage door drew everyone's attention. Lawrence Grant, the billionaire benefactor, was making his way backstage, ignoring the attempts of staff to direct him to the reception area. Where is she? Where's our violinist? His booming voice carried through the crowded space. When he spotted May, he broke into a broad smile and approached with extended hand. My dear woman, that was extraordinary. Simply extraordinary. May shook his hand, overwhelmed by the attention. Thank you, sir. Lawrence Grant, he introduced himself unnecessarily. I've heard that concerto performed by some of the greatest violinists in the world, but never with such heart. Tell me, where did you study? Why aren't you playing professionally? Before she could answer, Professor Wilson appeared at Grant's elbow, his face fixed in a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Grant, may I show you to the reception? The other board members are eager to speak with you. Grant waved him off impatiently. In a moment, Wilson. I'm speaking with Ms. Lin. He turned back to May, genuine curiosity in his eyes. Well, what's your story? May glanced at Professor Wilson's thunderous expression, then back at the kindly face of the billionaire. For the first time in years, she stood straight, no longer trying to make herself invisible. I studied in Shanghai until I was 27, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. Then life took me in a different direction. I came to America, had a son to raise, bills to pay. The violin had to wait. A tragedy, Grant declared. A genuine tragedy. But perhaps not a permanent one. He glanced meaningfully at Dr. Vasquez's card in May's hand. I have a feeling we haven't heard the last from you, Ms. Lin. As the wealthy man was finally led away by an insistent Director Phillips, May found herself surrounded by well-wishers and curious audience members. The night that was supposed to end in her humiliation had instead become something entirely different, a beginning rather than an end. From across the room, she caught Professor Wilson watching her, his expression dark with frustrated anger. He turned away when their eyes met, disappearing into the crowd of elegant gala attendees. For the first time in 15 years, May felt the weight of invisibility lift from her shoulders. She had been seen, truly seen, not as the woman who cleaned their floors, but as the artist she had always been beneath the uniform. The morning after the gala, May arrived at the conservatory with her cleaning cart as usual. She had barely slept, her mind still buzzing with the events of the previous night. The applause, the congratulations, the business card from Dr. Vasquez that now sat in her purse like a small precious stone. Part of her wondered if it had all been a dream. But something was different. As she pushed her cart down the main hallway, students who had never before acknowledged her existence now smiled and waved. A group of young violin students whispered excitedly as she passed, one of them calling out, Ms. Lin, could you show me how you did that run in the third section? Before she could answer, the conservatory's receptionist hurried toward her. There you are, May. Director Phillips wants to see you in his office right away. May's stomach tightened. Despite the success of her performance, she wondered if she was in trouble. Perhaps they felt she had embarrassed the institution in some way. Or maybe Professor Wilson had found a reason to fire her out of spite. When she entered the director's office, she was surprised to find not only Director Phillips but also Lawrence Grant and Dr. Vasquez waiting for her. Ah, Ms. Lin. Director Phillips rose from his chair, smiling broadly, the same man who had barely noticed her existence for 8 years. Please come in, sit down. May perched nervously on the edge of a leather chair, her hands folded in her lap. "Am I in trouble, sir?" Grant burst out laughing. "Trouble? My dear woman, you're the talk of the town. Have you seen the papers?" He pushed a newspaper across the desk. There on the front page of the arts section was a photograph of May playing the violin, her face transformed with passion. The headline read, "Cinderella Story at Westfield. Cleaning lady stuns elite with virtuoso performance." "Someone recorded your performance on their phone," Dr. Vasquez explained. "It's already gotten thousands of views online." May stared at the article in disbelief. "I don't understand. Why is this happening?" "People love an underdog story," Grant said, his eyes twinkling. "The cleaning lady who showed up the music snobs? It's irresistible." Director Phillips cleared his throat. "Ms. Lynn, we've called you here to discuss your future at Westfield." Here it comes, May thought. Despite everything, they were still going to let her go. "We would like to offer you a new position," the director continued, "as a part-time instructor in our community outreach program." May blinked in surprise. "Instructor? But I'm not qualified." "You played Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto from memory after a 15-year hiatus," Dr. Vasquez interrupted. "With some brushing up on technique, you're more than qualified to teach beginners. The pay would be triple what you earn in your current position," Director Phillips added, "with fewer hours and benefits." And Grant leaned forward. "I'd like to establish a scholarship in your name for working musicians who had to set aside their careers. A second chance fund, you might say. You would help select the recipients." May's eyes filled with tears. After years of invisibility, of being treated as part of the furniture, these important people were suddenly seeing value in her. "What about my cleaning position?" she asked, practical concerns surfacing through her emotion. "You can keep it if you wish," Director Phillips said quickly, "or we can help you find someone to replace you. And there's more," Dr. Vasquez added. "I've spoken with my department at the university. We would like to offer you a spot in our adult continuing education program. You could complete your music degree while teaching here." It was too much to absorb at once. Just 2 weeks ago, May had been nothing more than the woman who emptied their trash and polished their floors. Now they were talking about scholarships and teaching positions. "May I have some time to think about it?" she asked quietly. "Of course," Dr. Vasquez said, "but don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often." As May left the office, her mind spinning with possibilities, she nearly collided with Professor Wilson in the hallway. His face hardened at the sight of her. "Enjoying your 15 minutes of fame?" he asked coldly. May straightened her shoulders. "I played from my heart. That's all." "How fortunate for you that sentiment sells better than skill these days." His voice dripped with bitterness. "Don't let it go to your head. I've seen plenty of novelty acts come and go." Before she could respond, Thomas appeared, carrying a stack of sheet music. "Professor Wilson," he said with exaggerated politeness, "the board is asking for you. Something about explaining why you tried to humiliate a talented musician for your own amusement?" Wilson's face flushed red. Without another word, he turned and stalked away. "Don't mind him," Thomas said, watching the professor's retreating back. "He's been summoned to explain himself to the Board of Trustees." Lawrence Grant was not amused when he learned the full story. "I don't want anyone to get in trouble because of me," May said. Thomas shook his head. "Wilson's been terrorizing students and staff for years. It's about time someone stood up to him." He smiled at her. "So what did they offer you?" As May explained the proposals, Thomas's face lit up with genuine happiness for her. "You have to take it. This is what you were meant to do." "I don't know," May replied, uncertainty clouding her excitement. "My son depends on my income. I can't risk our stability for a dream." "Then call him," Thomas suggested. "See what he thinks." That evening, May sat on the edge of her bed, phone pressed to her ear, telling her son David everything that had happened. "Mom, that's amazing." His voice crackled with excitement over the poor connection. "I found the video online. Everyone in my dorm has seen it." "It's just a bit of attention that will fade," May said. "But they've offered me teaching positions, David. Less money at first, but—" "Take it," he interrupted. "Mom, you have to take it." "But your tuition, I've been meaning to tell you," David said. "I got that research assistant position I applied for. It comes with a tuition waiver for next semester, and I can pick up more hours at the campus tech center." "You're working too hard already," May protested. "So are you, Mom." His voice softened. For 15 years, you've cleaned other people's messes so I could have opportunities. Maybe it's time for you to have some too. Tears spilled down May's cheeks. When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher, he replied simply. 2 months later, May stood in front of a class of 8 students in Westfield's community music room. They were a diverse group: a retired postal worker who had always wanted to learn violin, a 13-year-old girl whose family couldn't afford private lessons, a middle-aged woman recovering from a stroke who was relearning to play. Music lives inside all of us, May told them, echoing the words Mr. Gao had once shared with her. The instrument just helps bring it out. She moved around the room, adjusting a hand position here, demonstrating a bow technique there. Her own playing had improved dramatically under Dr. Vasquez's tutelage. 3 evenings a week after teaching at Westfield, May attended classes at the university, slowly working toward the degree she had abandoned years ago. She still cleaned at the conservatory 2 nights a week, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. It kept her humble, reminded her of the journey she had taken. Some of her old co-workers now attended her beginner violin classes. Professor Wilson had been reprimanded but not fired. He avoided May in the hallways and never mentioned the night of the gala. But she had noticed that he had become more careful in how he spoke to the maintenance staff. As her beginner class ended, May gathered her things for her next appointment, a rehearsal with the university's community orchestra, where she now played second violin. She wasn't ready for solo performances yet, but Dr. Vasquez assured her that with time and practice, she could reach that level again. On her way out, she passed the practice room where everything had begun, room number 7, where Professor Wilson had caught her touching a student's violin. The door was open, and inside, Mr. Gao was showing a young student how to properly rosin a bow. He looked up as she passed and gave her a small nod of recognition and pride. No words were needed between them. They both understood what it meant to find your way back to a dream you thought was lost forever. Outside the conservatory, the spring sunshine warmed May's face as she walked toward the bus stop. Her violin case, her very own instrument now, purchased with her first paycheck as an instructor, bumped gently against her leg with each step. Life wasn't perfect. Money was still tight, and balancing teaching with her own studies was exhausting. Some nights she lay awake wondering if she was too old to start over, if this unexpected second chance would eventually slip through her fingers. But then she would remember the feeling of the violin beneath her chin, the music flowing through her like a river finding its natural course. She would think of her students' faces lighting up when they played a clean note for the first time, of David's pride when he'd attended her first orchestra performance. 2 months ago, Maylin had been invisible, just another aging immigrant woman cleaning up after those more fortunate than herself. Now, as she boarded the bus to the university, violin case in hand, she was becoming the person she had always been meant to be, not because of one lucky performance, but because she had found the courage to reclaim a part of herself that had been silenced for too long. As the bus pulled away from the curb, May opened the notebook where she kept her music theory homework. Life had given her a second movement, and this time, she intended to play every note.